This week's video is sponsored by Squarespace.
Well, hello everybody, and welcome to yet another video. Thank you ever so much for joining me. This is an extension of a video I put out just a little while ago called My Photography is Crap, and it's a continuation of my thought process when I pick images and some of the simple techniques or the things that I think about when I am processing my images. So without further delay, let's get stuck right in because I suspect this is going to be another long session. All right.
Okay, now for obvious reasons, I'm not going to process every image in this video. That will just take way too long. But what I will do is I'll just pick out some random photographs and pick them based on quick editing. I'm a strong believer in keeping things simple, both in the field and behind the computer. And now I know there's many of you out there that love processing and spend a lot of time doing processing. And I have absolutely nothing against processing. But for me, I like to keep things relatively simple with a few exceptions. So I'm just going to randomly pick out some photographs where I really don't have to do very much at all, but you know, I kind of like to show you how I go about just picking and editing these photographs really quickly. Actually, the one that we have here is a prime example, or even this photograph here. So obviously the first thing I want to do is just make sure that technically everything is spot on. And so if I zoom in on this, you can see that instantly we have a problem here. The image is unsharp. So I will be deleting that photograph, but before I do that, luckily I did take another photograph, same composition, well, slightly different I guess, but more or less the same composition. And you zoom in on that and that's lovely and sharp. So thank goodness for that. So that's, I guess, one reason to take many photographs of the same thing. So this I'm just going to remove, and I'm going to actually delete that from the disk because we don't want blurry photographs in our portfolio. Now the first thing I do is I just look at the photograph. So if you press F on your keyboard, that'll give you a full screen, and try to analyze what it is you like about the photograph and what is there that you can do to improve it, if anything. Just because you have it open in a program where you can manipulate images doesn't mean to say that you should or you have to. When I look at this photograph, I love the textures in it. I love the contrast between the blue and the yellows in here. The one thing that does strike me though is it's a little bit unbalanced to my eye. I love this section here, love all this here, but this here is a little empty. It also happens to be the brightest spot in the frame. My eye goes directly to this area here when really I want it to go to this spot here and over here and see all these lovely textures. So with that in mind, then you can start to proceed with how you want to edit your photograph. So let's get out of the full screen here. So how do I want to deal with this? Well, first of all, I think I'm going to crop this. Now we can play around with the crops. You can use the presets, or you can make your own presets, or you can just randomly crop it how you like it. I'm going to try 4:5. Just see what that looks like. I quite like that, except this is still a little bit blank. So I'm just going to bring this in ever so slightly, like so. And when I'm looking at that, I don't really like this section up here. So let's go back in here and just play around with the crop even more. I quite like that. There we go. Next on the agenda is how do I bring attention to these areas here? Well, we can first of all play around with the color balance. Now I quite like the color as it is, but we will play around with a little bit. The temperature in particular. If we warm it up, we suddenly lose that beautiful contrast between the blue and the yellow. So we don't want that. If I make it cooler, then that yellow still stays in there, and this is quite a bit blue. So I liked it as it was, but I'm going to just give it a little bit more blue. My apologies, I keep saying little all the time. I'm not really sure why everything's little. I'll try and avoid saying little from now on. All right. Very slight adjustments. Next, I want to brighten up this area and darken this area. Now, there are a number of ways we can do that, but I think I'm just going to make this really simple. Just going to grab a linear filter or gradient, make the image quite small so we can kind of get an idea of what we're doing here. And I'm just going to bring that gradient over and then lighten it up with just the exposure slider ever so slightly. And you can see already it's evened out the light. Next, I want to darken this section here. Just grab a brush. It's well feathered. Maybe bring the feathering down just a tad. And just going to brush in this area here. And again, going to use the exposure slider, except this time just darken it ever so slightly. So you can see by doing that already, we've eliminated the brightness of this section, and our eye is starting to go to the area that we deem as important. And if we want to lighten that up even more, we can grab another brush or a radial filter. I'll just grab a brush for this section. Just paint that around like so and bring up the whites like so. Okay, we're just going to turn the masks off here, and we're going to adjust the contrast. I've mentioned this a number of times. If you hold down the Alt or Option key and slide either the blacks or the white slider, it'll make the whole image go black or white. And as you slide it either way, the blacks will start to become noticeable. So as an example, I'm pressing down the Option or Alt key. I'm going to grab the black slider, and as I bring it down, you'll notice that the blacks start to come into play right at the end there. So that's just adding a deep black point in my photograph, and I'll do the same with the whites. Now, this doesn't mean to say that you have to do this with every photograph, because some photographs look way better when they're flatter, some look better when they're more contrasty, but it does add depth, contrast, depth. The blues are starting to get too strong, so I'm going to bring the temperature towards the yellow slightly. There we go. That is it. That's it for this photograph. So this is the before and this is the after. Or if we can go to the import here and the final image. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank Squarespace for continuing to support my channel and sponsoring this week's video. My favorite feature of my Squarespace website is the ability to quickly and efficiently update a gallery or page from my desktop computer or on the fly using the Squarespace app from my smartphone. Loading multiple images onto a page is quick and allows changing a page or design quickly and elegantly without any coding knowledge. Sound interesting? Why not head on over to squarespace.com and try it for free? If you like the platform, use the code AdamGibbs for 10% off your first purchase. Same with this photograph. This is another pattern shot. Doesn't need an awful lot doing to it. perhaps some contrast. Again, first I'll just play around with the temperature slider. I do tend to, not for all of my images, but I do tend to prefer many of my images on the cooler side, just a personal preference. The lighting is quite even. If anything, I might want to darken the top corner here. So very quickly, again, a linear gradient. And on this one, I'm just going to bring the highlights down and the whites like so. And if it's not quite how you want it, just slide that in. That's what's so great about Lightroom, is that it's so intuitive to use and it's very easy to move masks around. Okay, again, I'm just going to add some contrast to this photograph. So again, I'm just going to bring the black point down and the whites. And it's important to know, notice where the whites are showing up, because those are the brightest point in the whole image. So it tends to be, with this photograph, right across this whole section here. Now that might be just a little bit too much. There we go. I quite like that. Beautiful pattern, very simple photograph, even lighting. That's all I need to do to this photograph at this point. Now, perhaps later on, I might look at them again and think, okay, well, there are some sections in here that could use adjusting, and that's fine. But for an initial post-processing, this is all I do. Okay, let's do a landscape here. We seem to be concentrating more on rock patterns. As you can see, this was very early in the morning. The sun hadn't come up. It's a bit too dark. I've got issues with my sensor here with dust and such. I have ordered some swabs that'll actually clean a medium format camera. First things first, lens correction. Everything's enabled. I don't see any reason not to do that. I don't know why you wouldn't. Gets rid of chromatic aberration and also adjusts for any problems with your lenses. Basic, it's the most important section, I think, in Lightroom. And temperature is right at the top there. So let's adjust the temperature. Let's warm this thing up because it's way, way too cool. There we go. Boom, done. Of course, we can go back and adjust that. The horizon line is off. That's really bugging me. So let's sort that out. Boom, done. We can also crop this. I don't think we need all this room at the top. So let's bring that down to my favorite format, 4:5. And already you can see that the photograph has improved with just some really simple adjustments. I might warm that up ever so slightly more. Right, what else can we do to this? Well, I'd really like to brighten up the whites and bring out some more details in the shadows. The great thing about medium format camera that I've always loved is that dynamic range is just awesome. This image is slightly underexposed. So let's bring the exposure up. Let's bring the shadows up. If I brought them way up like this, you can see that there's virtually no noise in there whatsoever. There are a couple of dead pixels, I noticed, but in terms of noise, there's nothing really going on in there. Let's warm this up even more. Boom. All right, as you can see, we've really brightened this up. Next, the sky is bright up here and not so much down here. So I'd really love to bring the texture and the whites out of this rock formation. So how do we do that? Well, just grab a brush really quickly, make sure it's on auto mask so it doesn't go over the edges too much. The feathering I'm going to bring down as well as the size, and I'm just going to paint this really quickly. We'll just reduce the size of the brush here. See, you know, with the auto mask, it doesn't go over the edges as much. It's just a little bit easier to control. All right, good enough. There's one section here that we can get rid of. All right, so we're just going to bring the whites up, like so. There we go, done. If we want to bring more attention to this foreground, what we can do is add more contrast to this area. So we can bring the blacks down ever so slightly, bring the highlights up, warm it up, and we could add a bit more contrast, something like that. What we could do with the background, though, is we can haze it up a little bit so that it draws you in. So what I'm going to do with this section back here, auto mask again, I'm just going to paint this. And actually, I probably don't even need to be as accurate as I'm trying to be here. But let's just go with this. The other thing about processing is the image worth looking at? Is it worth processing? If you have a really bad photograph or you don't like it, then there's not really much point in spending time on it. So obviously I'm more drawn to some of these photographs than others, but some of these I think have a lot of potential. This one I actually really quite like. It might make a great black and white, but for now I'm just going to work on it in color. I just love the texture in the water here and the simplicity of it. So with this section here that I've marked out, I'm just going to add some haze with the dehaze. Not too much. You don't want to overdo it. Like so. So you'll notice that by adding contrast in the foreground and hardly any contrast in the background, we're adding some much needed depth because the light was very flat on this morning. Something else that we could do, now I don't know if this will work, but let's give it a go, is reduce the exposure on the top section here so it confines this area a little bit more, and perhaps on the bottom as well. So again, very simple, just grab a linear mask like so and just bring the exposure down. We'll use the curves on this one like so. It looks a bit uneven, so I think I'm going to use a radial and do the same on that. There we go. And the same with the bottom. I want to draw you into this section here. Linear. And again, we'll just use the curves on this one. There, ever so slightly. You don't overdo it. Lastly, I noticed there are a number of small, there's some pixels that are dead on this, and there are some dust spots. I'll do those later. I no need to bore you with those. Okay, we're just going to work on one more image here. And what I'll do is, if you want to see more of these processing videos, what I'll do is I'll make a few other videos and I'll put them on my Patreon page. So if you're interested in continuing to see how I do this, then just head on over to my Patreon page. And there is even a free trial if you want to try it out for a week. And if you enjoy it, then help support my channel. And perhaps you'll gain a few tips along the way as well. Why don't I do this one? This one I really loved when I took this photograph. Now there's two photographs here. There's this one, and we'll just take the stars off here. And then there's a long exposure that I want to mix in with that. So we'll just give that one 5 as well. And what I'll have to do is mix these up in Photoshop. But before I do that, I just want to play around with the colors ever so slightly. So there's a few things that I need to do here. First of all, lens corrections, we've done all that. Basic module, this is quite blue, so let's warm this up considerably. There was quite a bit of pink in there as well. I'd really love to add some contrast, especially in the back here. So there's a number of ways we can do that. We can either just add contrast, which works fine, or we can bring up the whites and bring down the blacks, which I kind of prefer, like so. We can even, let's see here, because the idea is to try and keep this really without too much contrast on the bottom. Just the contrast just needs to be more or less in the clouds. So what I could do here is I could either use a radial gradient or just a brush. I think for this one I'll just use a brush. Bring up the size and just paint this right across here. Oops, I've got auto mask on. Like so. And I'm just going to bring up the whites and the highlights. See, I like that. I love the contrast between the blue back there. Let's see what this looks like warmed up a bit. Yeah, that looks pretty good. All right, so we're just going to transfer all of that over to this scene here. So what I'm going to do now is just grab those two images, and we're going to open those up as layers in Photoshop. Open up the two layers, like so. And all I want to do is we'll just put a black mask on the top layer. So Option and click on the mask down here, and that will give us a black mask. Just need a brush, B for brush. Make sure that it is feathered 100%, and let's just reduce the size of this somewhat, B, and just start painting that in. We just have to make sure that we don't go over the clouds any, otherwise we're going to lose that beautiful sharpness and contrast between them. So let's just reduce the size of the brush. Quick tip, click on that area there and push down the shift key and click, and that'll do the horizon line for you. And there we go. Pretty easy. Let's just zoom in on that. Yeah, that looks fine. The clouds aren't quite as sharp as I'd hoped. I guess my exposure was, they were moving pretty fast. But that's at 100%. It's, you know, it's somewhat of an artist rendition, so sharpness isn't imperative here. In terms of more processing, I don't think I need to do too much. You'll notice that this cloud here is kind of my favorite. So what I've done is that's the lightest spot somewhat in the frame here. So your eye kind of goes to that. If anything, while I look at this, I might darken this section here just a tad so that it brings your attention more to this section here. And you'll notice some unevenness in the lighting. That's a totally personal thing. I like my lighting to be reasonably even. Not in every photograph, obviously, but this one, I think it would work better if it was just a tad more even.
Well, thank you ever so much for watching this week's video. I hope you enjoyed it. Please be sure to give me the old thumbs up. And also, please be sure to check out my new book, Land and Light. Now, I should mention that the book is now also available for pre-order from Beyond Words in Scotland. So European collectors can pick up a book at a lower shipping rate and save a few bucks in the process. Also, for everyone else who would like to purchase a copy, I am offering my Patreon members 25% off. So head over to my Patreon site if you would like to take advantage of those savings. As always, everybody, thank you ever so much. And until next time, bye-bye.